The alarm echoes across the frozen night of North Dakota, and for a split second, the silence of the base is broken by hurried boots striking the wet pavement. The sound is heavy, urgent, almost ritualistic. Inside the shelter, floodlights hum and flicker on, casting sharp shadows against the fuselage of a giant that refuses to age. At first glance, it looks like an artifact from a different era, a relic from the Cold War preserved in concrete hangars. But as switches are flipped and fuel begins to flow, this colossal machine reveals its secret. It is still alive, still relevant, still ready to carry out the mission for which it was built more than 7 decades ago. This is the B-52 Stratofortress, an aircraft designed for a war humanity hoped never to fight, and yet it continues to haunt the skies. The first impression is overwhelming. Its wings stretch more than 56 meters from tip to tip, longer than the width of a football field. They sag slightly on the ground under their own immense weight, but in the air they flex and bend like the branches of a tree in the wind. Beneath them hang 8 engines mounted in twin pods, an arrangement that looks almost absurd by modern standards, yet has kept this Leviathan airborne through every conflict since the Eisenhower administration. To stand beneath it is to feel small, dwarfed by a machine that was designed not to dazzle but to endure. And that sense of endurance is what grips the imagination, because unlike almost every other combat aircraft of the 1950s, the B-52 is still here, flying missions in the 21st century. Just like the B-52 keeps flying decades later, our mission also remains strong. If you enjoy stories that stand the test of time, subscribe now and join us on this flight. The story of how it came to be is almost as dramatic as the aircraft itself. In the late 1940s, the Boeing design team produced an early proposal for the next American bomber. It was conservative, a straight-wing aircraft powered by turboprops, hardly revolutionary. But in a legendary meeting, the engineers sensed they were building something already outdated. Overnight, they scrapped the drawing board and reimagined the aircraft with swept wings, turbojet power, and a fuselage built like a steel bridge. It was a gamble, a leap of faith into jet-age aerodynamics. What rolled out of Boeing's hangars in Seattle in 1952 was something the world had never seen. An intercontinental nuclear bomber with speed, range, and payload that dwarfed anything else in existence. That moment sealed the B-52's destiny as both a weapon and a symbol, a machine that embodied the sheer scale of the Cold War. The details of its design tell us everything about its mission. The fuselage is long and cylindrical, almost plain compared to the sleek fighters of its era. But every meter of that space was calculated to carry not just fuel and crew, but also the most devastating payloads ever conceived. To support this immense mass, Boeing engineers created one of the strangest landing gear systems in aviation history. Instead of traditional wing-mounted gear, the B-52 sits on 4 sets of wheels, in tandem under its belly, with tiny outrigger wheels under the wings to keep it balanced. Watching it land is an exercise in suspense. The pilot must crab the entire aircraft into the wind, straighten it at the last second, and then let the tandem wheels absorb the impact as the outriggers kiss the runway. No other aircraft of its size moves with such awkward grace, and yet for decades crews have mastered this delicate dance, proof that design quirks can become tradition. Even in its early tests, the B-52 showed a personality of its own. Pilots described it as heavy on the controls, yet surprisingly agile for its size. Engineers joked that it looked like a pencil with wings, and they were not wrong. But that pencil could climb higher than most fighters of the day, cruise for more than 8,000 miles without refueling, and carry nuclear weapons to targets on the far side of the planet. At the height of the Cold War, B-52 crews lived in constant readiness, sometimes spending weeks on alert, sleeping in underground bunkers just a few steps from their aircraft. They knew that at any moment the siren could sound and they would be in the air within minutes, heading north over the Arctic toward a mission they hoped would never be real. It was in those early years that the Stratofortress acquired its reputation as both monstrous and eternal. Civilians living near Air Force bases grew accustomed to its thunderous departures, the roar of 8 engines shaking windows miles away. Children pointed at the sky as the black silhouettes climbed into the stratosphere, knowing instinctively that these machines carried the fate of nations inside their bomb bays. The B-52 became more than a bomber. It became a cultural icon of deterrence, the embodiment of a fragile peace balanced on the edge of destruction. When school children in the 1950s practiced duck and cover drills, somewhere overhead a Stratofortress was on patrol, ready to retaliate if deterrence ever failed. Yet behind that intimidating presence lies a story of improvisation and resilience. The aircraft was never expected to last beyond 20 years. Military planners assumed that by the 1970s it would be replaced by sleek, supersonic bombers like the B-70 Valkyrie, but the Valkyrie was canceled, and the B-1 Lancer faced endless delays. Each time a successor stumbled, the Air Force returned to the same question. Could the B-52 be upgraded again? The answer, surprisingly, was always yes. Strong bones, vast internal volume, and conservative aerodynamics made it the perfect candidate for modernization. New avionics replaced old dials, electronic warfare systems were added, and its role expanded from nuclear deterrence to conventional bombing. Like an old soldier who refuses to retire, the B-52 adapted to each new era without losing its original purpose. This first glimpse of its history is only the beginning. The roar on the runway, the wing flexing under strain, the landing gear wobbling like stilts, all of it hints at deeper stories waiting inside. Stories of engines that carried it across oceans, bomb bays that once promised Armageddon and later delivered precision strikes, cockpits where crews lived through the tension of nuclear alerts and the chaos of real wars. To understand why this massive, ugly, magnificent machine still dominates the skies, we must look closer, peel back the layers of metal, and step into the world of power and paradox that defines the B-52. Because the giant that awakens in the cold of a North Dakota night is not just an airplane. It is a time machine, a survivor of an age when the world balanced on a knife's edge, still reminding us that history is never truly past. And as we move forward, the question lingers, how did this relic of the 1950s become the backbone of American air power well into the 21st century? The answer lies in its engines, its fuel, and the strange logic of endurance that we will uncover next. The true heart of the Stratofortress lies in the thunder of its engines. 8 Pratt & Whitney TF-33 turbofans hang in twin pods beneath the wings, their placement both practical and iconic. Each nacelle holds 2 engines side by side, a choice that reduces drag and simplifies maintenance, but also creates that unmistakable silhouette. When they spool up together, the combined roar is not just sound, it is vibration that travels through the runway, through the ground, and into the chest of anyone standing nearby. These engines are relics of an earlier generation, thirsty and loud, yet they have proven themselves reliable enough to keep the B-52 in service long after its contemporaries have disappeared into museums. Crews joke that each takeoff feels like unleashing a rolling earthquake, a sensory reminder that power, more than elegance, was the design philosophy from the beginning, that power translates into numbers that seem almost exaggerated. Fully loaded with fuel and weapons, the aircraft weighs more than 200 metric tons. And yet, once those engines surge and the wings lift, the B-52 is capable of staying aloft for more than 14 hours without refueling. Add the aerial tankers that extend its reach, and suddenly it becomes a machine with near global range, able to circle continents before ever touching down again. The reality of this endurance is staggering. Imagine a crew climbing into the cockpit before sunrise, taking off from Louisiana, refueling over the Atlantic, releasing cruise missiles near Eastern Europe, then turning around and flying home, all without ever setting foot on foreign soil. That kind of reach is why the B-52 has been called both a fortress and a shadow, present everywhere, rarely seen until it needs to be. The key to this endurance is not just the engines, but also the wing design. Long, narrow, and flexible, the wings look fragile when viewed from the ground, drooping under their own weight like tired arms. But once the Stratofortress is airborne, they come alive, bending and flexing in the turbulence with an almost organic rhythm. Engineers discovered early on that this flexibility reduced structural stress, allowing the aircraft to carry immense loads without cracking its frame. Pilots often say that flying the B-52 feels like watching a living creature breathe. Those wings, fragile to the eye, are precisely what keep the aircraft in the sky for days at a time, holding steady even when fully loaded with fuel, bombs, and missiles. Every ripple in their surface tells a story of adaptation, of how an aircraft designed in the 1950s can still handle modern missions without breaking apart. But what truly sets the B-52 apart is what it carries inside. At the center of its fuselage lies a bomb bay that could easily be mistaken for the interior of a small apartment. In its earliest years, that space was reserved for the most terrifying weapons humanity had ever built. Nuclear bombs large enough to level entire cities. The Cold War doctrine was brutally simple. Deter the enemy by threatening devastation on a scale they could never accept. Crews trained tirelessly to execute that mission, rehearsing launch sequences, navigation over polar routes, and electronic countermeasures to ensure that if deterrence failed, the retaliation would be swift and overwhelming. The sheer volume of the bay meant the B-52 could carry not one, but multiple weapons, each capable of reshaping history in an instant. And so the aircraft became the very embodiment of deterrence, a machine designed to never be used, yet always ready. As decades passed, the mission changed, but the bay remained. Instead of nuclear bombs, engineers began to adapt it for conventional weapons. Suddenly, the cavernous space could release dozens of bombs at once, blanketing entire grid squares with steel and fire. During conflicts in Southeast Asia, formations of B-52s flew in staggered patterns, their bomb bays opening in unison, creating shockwaves that shook the earth for miles. Villagers described the sound as a rolling thunder that never stopped, a storm born not from the sky, but from machines. The ability to deliver such concentrated force gave the Stratofortress a new identity, not only as a nuclear deterrent, but as a conventional weapon of immense power. It was no longer just about preventing war, it was about fighting it on a scale no other bomber could match. Yet even that role was not the final stage of its evolution. By the late 20th century, warfare was changing. Precision became the new demand, and indiscriminate carpet bombing was no longer acceptable in many theaters. Once again, the B-52 adapted. The same bomb bay that once carried nuclear giants and unguided bombs was retrofitted to release precision-guided munitions. Now it could drop J-dams guided by GPS, mines tailored to deny enemy ships, or specialized bombs designed to cripple power grids without destroying entire cities. The arrival of air-launched cruise missiles extended its reach even further. Suddenly, the B-52 no longer needed to cross hostile borders. It could launch its weapons from more than 2,000 kilometers away, letting missiles glide silently toward their targets, while the bomber itself remained safely out of range. This transformation was nothing short of revolutionary. A platform once built for mass destruction had become an instrument of surgical precision. The electronics inside followed the same path. At first, the Stratofortress carried only rudimentary navigation equipment and radio systems, enough to cross oceans, but not much more. Over time, layer upon layer of electronics were added. Redundant inertial navigation ensured that the aircraft could find its target even if satellites were jammed. High-frequency radios allowed communication across continents. Pods bristling with antennas provided electronic countermeasures capable of jamming radars, confusing missiles, and deceiving enemy defenses. By the time the Cold War ended, the B-52 had become a flying laboratory of electronic warfare, constantly upgraded to meet each new challenge. Pilots often remarked that the aircraft seemed less like a bomber and more like a platform for every technology the Air Force could fit inside. Each system made it harder to retire, because every upgrade extended its usefulness just a little further into the future. The result of all these adaptations is an aircraft that defies its own age. Few machines designed in the 1950s are still in frontline service today, and fewer still have been modernized to the point where they rival their successors. The B-52 is one of those rare exceptions. It carries the scars of countless missions, the smell of hydraulic fluid soaked into its panels, the faded paint touched up after decades of use, yet it continues to rise from runways around the world. Crews who flew their first missions in Vietnam can walk onto the ramp today and recognize the same outline, the same sound, the same feel, but inside the systems are decades more advanced. It is a paradox of aviation, an ancient frame powered by evolving technology, always old and always new. And as we reach this point in its journey, one question lingers. How does a machine built in an age of nuclear brinkmanship continue to remain central in wars that are smaller, more precise, and more complex? The answer lies not only in its adaptability, but also in the men and women who crewed it, who learned to trust its quirks and harness its raw power. To understand the next stage of the B-52's story, we must climb inside the cockpit, among the crew stations and glowing panels, and listen to the voices that kept it alive through decades of change. Because the heart of the Stratofortress is not just in its engines or bomb bays, it is in the people who flew it into history, and their story is the one that awaits us next. Just like the B-52 keeps flying decades later, our mission also remains strong. If you enjoy stories that stand the test of time, subscribe now and join us on this flight. Step inside the cockpit of the Stratofortress, and you immediately feel the weight of its history. It is not sleek like the glass cockpits of modern fighters, nor minimalist like the interiors of stealth bombers. Instead, it is a tight space filled with dials, switches, and panels that stretch from floor to ceiling, a place where every inch has a purpose. In the earliest days, 6 crew members occupied this floating control room. The aircraft commander and co-pilot up front, the navigator and radar navigator tucked below the deck, the electronic warfare officer monitoring threats, and at the very back, the tail gunner guarding the sky behind. Each position was essential, each voice part of a carefully rehearsed rhythm that kept the bomber alive. There was no comfort here, only discipline and focus, because the mission allowed no margin for error. Over time, as technology advanced, that cockpit began to change. The glowing green radar scopes of the Cold War gave way to digital displays, cathode ray tubes were replaced by multifunction screens, and analog dials yielded to software-driven readouts. The tail gunner disappeared, a relic of an era when Soviet fighters might swarm the lumbering bomber from behind. By the 1990s, the tail cannon itself was removed, and with it the last echoes of World War II-style defensive doctrine. Yet the cockpit retained its cramped, almost claustrophobic feel. Pilots still reached for heavy yokes, navigators still hunched over charts and instruments, and checklists were still read with the same ritual cadence. The B-52 never allowed its crews to forget that they were flying a machine born of the 1950s. No matter how modern the electronics installed inside, that sense of continuity became part of its identity. A link between generations of aviators who could recognize the same smells of oil and the same vibration under their seats. In the 1960s, strategy shifted, and the bomber learned a new trick, flying low. If it could not outrun radar and missiles at high altitude, it would hide beneath them, sweeping across valleys and plains at just a few hundred feet above the ground. For crews, this was both exhilarating and terrifying. Imagine guiding an aircraft the size of a small skyscraper through mountain passes, relying on radar to read the contours of the Earth and autopilot systems to hold the course. The wings flexed wildly, the engines roared at full throttle, and every bump in the air sent the entire fuselage shuddering. But the logic was clear. Flying low gave the B-52 a chance to survive in a world where surface-to-air missiles were multiplying at an alarming rate. It was an unnatural maneuver for such a giant, but one that became second nature to the pilots who mastered it. Then came Vietnam, the crucible that tested both the machine and the men who flew it. The B-52s became synonymous with operations like Arclight and Linebacker, where formations of these bombers dropped thousands of pounds of ordnance in carefully timed waves. To those on the ground, the effect was apocalyptic. The earth shook, the sky thundered, and entire landscapes seemed to vanish under the impact. To the crews, it was routine precision, holding formation, following radar vectors, releasing payloads exactly on cue. Yet it was also dangerous. North Vietnamese surface-to-air missiles sliced into the sky, hunting the bombers with deadly accuracy. Many B-52s returned home riddled with holes, their fuselages scarred, their engines trailing smoke. Some never returned at all. The survivors carried back stories etched into their memories: the sudden flash of a missile, the jolt of an explosion, the desperate shouts of crew members coordinating damage control as alarms blared. Each mission was a reminder that the Stratofortress was powerful, but not invincible. What Vietnam revealed was not just the destructive capacity of the B-52, but its resilience. Crews discovered that the aircraft could absorb punishment that would cripple lesser planes. Damaged wings held together, engines that had been struck still produced thrust, and redundant systems allowed navigation and communication to continue even under fire. Stories spread through the Air Force of bombers limping home on 3 or even 2 engines, of aircraft that should have fallen from the sky but somehow made it back to base. These tales of survival became part of the Stratofortress legend, reinforcing the belief that this was not just a bomber, but a fortress in the truest sense of the word. When the Cold War ended, the B-52's role shifted again. It was no longer only a nuclear deterrent or a carpet bombing machine. In the Gulf War, the Stratofortress demonstrated a new precision, launching cruise missiles and guided bombs against targets deep inside Iraq. Suddenly, the same aircraft that had once threatened cities could now disable a power plant or air defense system with a surgical accuracy. In Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq, the B-52 proved itself again, orbiting for hours above the battlefield, ready to release smart munitions whenever ground forces called for support. Soldiers on the ground learned to trust the distinctive rumble of its engines overhead, knowing that when the Stratofortress was nearby, the enemy's defenses would soon crumble. This shift in role also changed how the public viewed the bomber. No longer just a symbol of nuclear Armageddon, it became a workhorse of modern precision warfare. Its nickname, Buff, big, ugly, fat fellow, was uttered with affection, not disdain. Crews who once feared they would only fly in the opening moments of World War III now found themselves supporting troops in real conflicts, delivering decisive strikes that changed the course of battles. The Stratofortress was proving yet again that it could evolve with the times, refusing to fade into obsolescence even as newer bombers entered service. Yet for all these adaptations, the essence of the aircraft remained the same. It was still vast, still loud, still ungainly on the ground and graceful in the air. Pilots still joked about its quirks, like the way its long wings bounced on turbulent days or how its landing gear crab-walked down runways in crosswinds. Electronic warfare officers still scanned for threats, their eyes on screens filled with static and signals, and navigators still calculated courses with backups of paper charts, because even the most advanced systems can fail. It was this mixture of old and new, of ancient design and modern upgrades that kept the B-52 alive. Every mission became a bridge between eras, flown by crews who knew they were inheriting a legacy larger than themselves. And so, when the Stratofortress roars into the sky today, it carries not only weapons, but decades of history etched into its frame. It has endured the nuclear standoff of the Cold War, the firestorms of Vietnam, and the precision strikes of modern warfare. Each conflict has left its mark, reshaping both the aircraft and the people who operate it. But the question lingers: how much longer can this aging giant continue to adapt? The answer lies not just in its cockpit or its tactics, but in the very structure of the machine itself, in the engineering choices that made it far stronger and more durable than anyone expected. To understand the secret of its longevity, we must look deeper into its bones, into the metal and rivets that have carried it across generations. Because the story of the B-52 is not only about battles fought, but about survival through time, and that survival is what we must uncover next. The secret to the Stratofortress's survival is written not in the paint on its skin, but in the bones beneath. Its airframe is a lattice of steel and aluminum that was never meant to last beyond 2 decades. And yet, every inspection reveals a structure with more life left in it. The long spars that run from wingtip to wingtip act like the backbone of a suspension bridge, distributing stress across the fuselage so efficiently that the bomber can flex, absorb, and endure in ways designers in the 1950s could hardly predict. Where cracks appear, they are drilled out, patched, or reinforced. Where corrosion creeps in, it is scrubbed away and sealed. Each repair is another signature in a long book of survival, a record that proves the B-52 is not just maintained but reborn, again and again, by the hands of engineers and crews who refuse to let it fade. What keeps it alive is a combination of rugged design and meticulous care. Unlike modern passenger jets that endure thousands of pressurization cycles every year, the B-52's operational profile means fewer cycles, less fatigue, and fewer of the microfractures that eventually doom other airframes. It was built in an era of over-engineering, when weight savings were sacrificed for strength, and those thick ribs and heavy rivets are precisely what give the bomber its longevity. Crews sometimes describe it as a flying battleship, not because of its weapons, but because of the way its hull feels more like armor than skin. The irony is that this brute strength, considered excessive at the time, is exactly why the Stratofortress can still fly missions decades after its intended retirement. But structure alone is not enough. The B-52 has survived because it has continuously accepted change. Inside its fuselage, layers of analog wiring have been replaced with digital bus systems, racks of black boxes have been swapped for compact computers, and new sensors have been embedded alongside vintage ones. It is a patchwork of eras where technology from the 1960s shares space with equipment designed just a few years ago. Step into its avionics bays, and you will find a museum and a laboratory coexisting, each upgrade extending its life by another decade. This adaptability has turned the B-52 into something unique in aviation, a platform so versatile that it has carried weapons and systems never imagined when it first rolled out of the factory. The engines tell the same story. For decades, the TF-33s have powered it through countless hours of flight, but they are loud, thirsty, and outdated. Soon, they will be replaced by modern turbofans that promise quieter operations, greater fuel efficiency, and reduced heat signatures. It is a transformation as dramatic as a heart transplant, breathing new life into an airframe already past its golden anniversary. With the new engines, the bomber will be able to stay aloft even longer, consume less fuel, and operate in ways that make it more survivable in a modern battlefield filled with sensors and missiles. It is as if the Stratofortress is shedding its age without surrendering its soul, a machine given yet another chance to prove its relevance. Still, some challenges remain eternal. The wings, long and thin, flex so dramatically in turbulence that they appear alive. This flexibility is a strength, but it also makes crosswind landings a spectacle. Watch a B-52 crab its way toward a runway, nose pointed into the wind while the fuselage slides sideways, and you understand just how unique its landing gear system is. 4 tandem sets of wheels under the fuselage absorb the weight, while tiny outrigger wheels keep the wings from dragging on the ground. The entire gear assembly can swivel, allowing the aircraft to touch down while still angled into the wind. To pilots, mastering this landing is a rite of passage, a challenge that demands finesse and patience. It is one more reminder that the Stratofortress is not just another aircraft, it is a living puzzle that must be learned, respected, and tamed. Despite its quirks, the numbers it delivers remain unmatched. It can carry a payload greater than any other Western bomber still flying, with intercontinental range and the ability to launch both nuclear and conventional weapons. Its bomb bay and wing pylons can release cruise missiles, smart bombs, and even experimental weapons that point toward the future. This capacity ensures that whenever the United States considers how to project power across the globe, the B-52 is part of the discussion. It is not about nostalgia, it is about practicality. No other bomber offers the same combination of reach, capacity, and flexibility. It is an old frame with a young heart, and that paradox is what makes it indispensable. Every takeoff becomes a performance, a spectacle that continues to captivate even in the age of stealth. The bomber lumbers onto the runway, wings sagging under its own weight, and for a moment it seems too heavy to ever leave the ground. Then the engines thunder, the air vibrates, and the massive frame begins its slow roll forward. Dust and exhaust plume behind it as the wheels rattle down the concrete. Finally, the wings start to lift, flexing as though straining against gravity itself, and the giant rises. Not like a bird, but like a ship setting sail into the sky. The sight is mesmerizing, a living reminder that power does not always come dressed in elegance. And yet, for all its age, the Stratofortress is still evolving. New radars are being installed capable of mapping terrain, tracking ships, and guiding weapons with pinpoint accuracy. Advanced communications link it seamlessly to satellites, fighters, and command centers. Its bomb bays are being adapted to carry next-generation munitions, weapons that are smarter, stealthier, and more versatile than anything it has carried before. These upgrades are not temporary fixes. They are deliberate steps to keep the B-52 relevant well into the mid-21st century. Remarkably, the bomber that first flew in the age of black and white television may still be flying in the era of artificial intelligence and unmanned swarms. The irony is hard to ignore. Designed to last 3 years, the Stratofortress is on track to serve for a century. Grandfathers who once sat in its cockpit now watch their grandchildren train on the same machine. Museums preserve early variants as relics, yet just across the airfield, upgraded versions still roar into the sky for real missions. It is not just an aircraft. It is a continuum of history, a bridge between generations, and a symbol of endurance in an age when technology is expected to be disposable. And so the question remains, what does the future hold for the B-52? Its frame can be reinforced, its systems can be modernized, its engines can be replaced, but at some point, even this fortress will meet its limits. The answer is not clear, and perhaps that is the point. The Stratofortress has defied predictions for so long that it seems almost immortal, a machine that insists on rewriting its own obituary. As long as the world demands reach, power, and endurance, there will be a place for this giant in the skies. And when the next siren wails in the middle of the night, when crews race once more across a cold runway, the wings of the B-52 will rise again, reminding us that some legends are not written to end,